All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Thanks again for being here this Friday. Just got about a little more than 3 minutes until class time, and then we'll just be ready to go. Hi, Cordy. Good morning. Hi, Kylie. How's it going? Hey, Sebastian. Good to see you. And she's just really relaxed this morning. She's sitting right below the computer, so I just picked her up. She's too cute. Morning, good girl. Hi, Zachary. Just another minute or so. She's still a little sleepy, I guess. It's one thing I will miss when we go back to real classes, being able to just hang out with the cat while I'm teaching. This is the same cat, yeah. Well, I mean, I do have two cats, but usually Peach is the one that makes an appearance, so yeah. Bring him out. They probably wouldn't mind it, honestly. Well, Peachy wouldn't mind it. The other one's very shy. Okay, guys, good morning. Welcome back. We're pretty much now to 10 a.m., so I'm going to let us get started. Thanks, as usual, for arriving at the meeting on time. Go ahead and, if you haven't had a chance, make sure to give a comment in the chat so that your attendance is recorded. And yeah, let's just jump right into our meeting today. So when we were here last time, we were working through the last couple of authors on philosophy of religion. Today we're going to finish all that material up, and then next week we're going to start fresh on a new topic in the class. Hi guys, I see all you here. So hi Cordy, Kylie, Sebastian, Zachary, Olga, Sydney, Nigel, McKenna, Chase, Ben, Claire, Annabella, Lane. Appreciate you guys being here and making the meeting fun and interesting. So let's just return to the notes. I was talking to you guys last time when we finished about the material of Robert McKim. Okay, and Robert McKim's paper from 2001 called The Hiddenness of God. Okay, so morning all. The Hiddenness of God, Robert McKim, 2001, American philosopher who teaches at the University of Illinois at Urbana. And I think I told you guys a little bit about the paper before we broke last time. Who has any memory or notes that they can refer to just bring us back to where we were? Let me know what you have. in your notes or memory about the McKim, and then I'll kind of just take us back up to that point and then continue from there. Let me know anything at all, even if it's just like a quick sentence or something about what you can recall. Yeah, it's about the idea that God is hidden. That's true. So I can mention that. So the whole point of this discussion here is, what should we think about the fact that God is hidden? You can't just verify his existence like me or you exactly. So the existence of Chapman University, for example, if you want to know whether it exists, you could just go and see it, and then you could like obviously establish that fact. And the same is true of anything else that exists in the normal course of things. You know, like my existence, easy to verify just by looking and seeing or hearing my voice. So God, though, is not immediately verifiable by means of the five senses. So that's why there's even a debate as to whether he exists or not. And there's not a debate as to whether, for example, Chapman University or whatever exists, or the moon. So what should we make of the fact that God is hidden? Okay, so he gives us this little hypothetical scenario to focus our mind around the question a little bit more tightly. And that's, I think, something that I was speaking about at the end last time too. So he says, imagine this situation as follows. There's an island. There's people that live on the island. There's a civilization of people that live there. But the thing is, as far as they know, and for all they can remember, there's never been any visitors who've come from anywhere outside of the island. And also, nobody on the island has ever ventured off. So for all the people know, this could even be the whole realm of human civilization, since they don't know of anyone outside the island, and they've never attempted to leave it. So that's the island, self-contained, isolated civilization of people that hold the presumption that maybe they're all the only people that exist anywhere. Okay, but there are these legends and rumors that come from some of the elders in the island, and they tell these stories. They say that a long time ago, this island used to be a part of a great big empire. So it wasn't always this isolated community, but it used to be one island that was part of a larger network of islands that together formed a big empire. And another aspect of these myths and legends was that there used to also be a great emperor that ruled over the island, and he was the one that presided over it, this great and good emperor. Now, not everyone that's on the island knows what to think of these stories. Some people just regard them as myths and superstitions, but other people take them more seriously. So anyway, that's the first point I would tell you about our little narrative. There's an island community, isolated from outside contact. Maybe that's the only realm of human people, but there are legends and myths according to which it used to be part of a bigger empire and that there was a big, great emperor. Okay, so now one day on the island, something very interesting and sort of surprising happens. There are ships that are coming in off of the ocean towards the shore. And so people on the island are clearly very startled by that, since, as I told you, they've never seen anyone come from anywhere else for as far back as recorded memory can go. So a group gathers on the shore waiting for the arrival of these ships. And a guy comes down off of the ship and he speaks to them and he says, "Hello, everybody. I'm glad that you're here because I have a message to send you. I know that you've heard that this here is there are legends that you guys have heard from your elders. Your elders have told you that this used to be part of a great big empire. And we're here to say that's actually true, yes. So we can confirm these rumors are not just myths and legends, but these are facts. This is a part of a great big empire, and you guys just have kind of lost touch with the remainder of the empire over the generations. The other thing is, we know that you've heard about the concept of the emperor that rules the empire. And we're also here to tell you that he exists. In fact, he sent us to you with this message in mind. He sent us to you to ask if you would all be willing to declare your loyalty and your allegiance to him. Because he is your emperor, actually. It's just that you've lost touch with the rest of the empire. And he wants to reclaim this part of the empire for himself and for the empire. So he's asking you guys to just submit to him, to devote yourself to him, and to follow his rule as your leader. But there's one more thing we forgot to tell you about the emperor, okay? So we call him the hidden emperor. Now, why do you think they call him the hidden emperor? Well, here's the reason. Because, they say, we call him the hidden emperor since he's never ever allowed himself to be seen by anybody. He will not reveal himself. He will not reveal himself even to his closest followers. So he doesn't come out in the open and show himself so that we can see or hear or whatever, perceive him. But we very much believe in him. We believe that he exists and that he can become invisible and that he can read people's minds and that he can be in multiple places at once. He's just awesome and mysterious with his power, but that's the hidden emperor. Anyway, back to our question, everyone. What will it be? Will you guys today submit to his rule and tell us that you're going to become his loyal followers? Yes or no? So they give him that question, and that's their choice. So having heard this, the crowd is kind of buzzing with discussion, and people are, wondering what they should think or do based on this statement. Out of the crowd, a guy steps forward. And in the book, in the article, he's just described as a bearded man. So my artistic skills are not amazing, but I'm doing what I can to draw a bearded man, and that's him. So he steps forward and he says, hey, everybody, I want to speak to my fellow islanders here. These guys are saying there's a hidden emperor and we're supposed to worship him and devote to him and become his loyal subjects. And I was okay with everything they were saying. I was following them until they got to the part where he's hidden. You lost me on the hidden thing. Why is he hidden? I don't understand that. Why should there be a hidden emperor? If he exists, wouldn't he just be willing to reveal himself? I mean, nobody's guessing or questioning my existence, this guy says. So if he wants us to believe in him, I mean, the most easy and straightforward thing would be to just reveal himself, and then none of us would doubt that he exists, and we could all just agree and just devote ourselves to him and believe in him. You missionaries are telling us that though he exists and though he wants us to believe in him, he won't reveal himself. Now, what sense does that make? If he wants us to believe in him, that's easy. We could get that done, but he has to show himself. Otherwise, I have a lot of doubts. It doesn't really make sense that he wants us to believe in him, but yet he still remains hidden. So I just don't think that there's any emperor. These missionaries are either confused or deceived or something, but it doesn't make sense. Their story doesn't add up. I refuse to believe in the hidden emperor. So that's what he says, okay? After he speaks, another person from the crowd steps forward, and she's just described as a woman. So I'm just going to draw. I mean, I know not all women have longer hair, obviously, but it's just a caricature. So she steps forward and she says, but hold on. To my friend with the beard, I have a different reaction. I could sort of understand, it makes sense to me maybe why he wants to stay hidden. Because if he's hidden, and he's not just out there in the open, then that means that he's giving us a choice whether to believe in him or not. If he wasn't hidden, then there would be no choice. It would be just seeing is believing. We can't deny it. It's undeniable. And then there would be no element of taking a decision. And maybe it's important to him to see who will choose to believe, make a little leap of faith, even though the evidence of his existence is not available. Maybe he wants to sort of test us a little bit and see who the true believers are. And also, perhaps, it establishes a kind of subordinate relationship where he's higher above us because he's hidden and we're not, so it kind of might enhance the majesty and mystery of who he is. So she says, I actually do think there could be this emperor. It makes sense to me why he chooses to remain hidden. So I'm not the skeptic like he is. That's so she's on the opposite side, and she kind of believes in the emperor. Now, after that, someone in the middle comes forward, and this guy is just described as like, I don't know, a moderate person that's splitting the difference between the other two sides. So he says, hey guys, okay, break it up. Look, I want to say both of my friends here are making some valid points, but the way I see it is something in the middle. So on your behalf, saying to the believer, this guy says there's no evidence at all that the emperor exists. But this is not totally true. I mean, sure, there's no evidence like in terms of something that you can see or touch or hear, but there are these missionaries that have arrived here that are just telling us that he exists. So there are stories and their testimony. It's not like observable evidence, but it's not nothing either. So that's something to go on to believe that the emperor exists. Plus, we have these half-remembered legends of our elders that sort of corroborate what they're saying. So those two things are not just completely devoid of evidence. There's some measure of evidence. But on the other hand, I kind of understood your point, Mr. Bearded Man, when you said that it's a bit odd for the emperor to choose to stay hidden if what he wants from us is to believe in him. I kind of felt you when you were saying, why doesn't he just reveal himself then? So here's my point, or my position. I have a kind of middle ground position. The hiddenness of the emperor, to me, this is him speaking, the intermediate person. He says the hiddenness of the emperor to me could be explained in one of two possible ways. One explanation would just be that there is actually no emperor, and that would obviously explain why he appears to be hidden. But another possibility is that maybe there is an emperor and he does choose to be hidden. But if that's the case, then I think he doesn't actually care at all whether we believe in him or not. Because why, if he cares whether we believe in him, would he not make it easier for us to do that? It seems like it's of no interest to him whether we believe in him or not, because he refuses to reveal himself. So these three individuals, relative to this whole story of the emperor, are obviously just metaphors for the real issue that we are debating and discussing in this philosophy class and in life, which is about the existence of God. So this bearded guy stands for like the skeptic, the person who, and obviously the hidden emperor is just a metaphor for God himself, right? Because this is supposed to be someone who's asking you to believe in them and to devote yourself to them and to submit yourself to them, but they're not making it easy for you to know that they exist. And so the skeptic represents a person who says, in light of God not being apparent to my senses, I'm not sure, and I maybe don't think they exist. This individual, the woman on the other end, represents and just stands for the believer, the person who says, although there's not like absolute proof from the five senses, I think there are legitimate reasons why God would prefer to be hidden in order to give us a choice about whether we're going to have faith or not. And then this person in the middle, McKim labels tentative believer. The tentative believer, the person who says, I'm not sure, God being hidden, maybe there's no God, or maybe there is a God, but he's not so interested in our belief status as many people would have thought. Now, in the end, Robert McKim, the author, he sides with the tentative believer. He thinks that's the most reasonable position to take, given that God is hidden. So yeah, his view is that God being hidden could be meaning that he either doesn't exist or that he does, but if he exists and he chooses to stay hidden, he might not care so much whether we believe in him or not. Now, how can this function as an objection to Pascal's wager? Because remember, you're interested in the question of two objections to Pascal's wager. One of them could have been Clifford, who says it's wrong to believe things without good evidence, and in that way, he would reject Pascal's invitation to believe in God despite the lack of proof. McKim is saying that it's possible that God being hidden doesn't really care whether we believe in him or not. And if God did not care whether we believed or not, then the wager itself would no longer hold the stakes that Pascal thinks that it does. Because Pascal's assumption is that God cares whether you believe in him because he's going to punish you if you don't, and he's going to reward you if you do. But if he doesn't care whether you believe in him or not, then there's actually nothing to worry about in not believing, because it's not necessarily going to incur the wrath of God, right? Only if one assumes that it matters to God whether you believe in him or not would we attach the assigned penalties and rewards that are envisioned in Pascal's wager. So now we have an author, McKim, suggesting that maybe God does not necessarily reward merely based on you believing him, and does not necessarily decline to reward or even punish merely on the basis that a person does not believe in him. So we have to have this assumption that it matters to God whether you believe or not in order for the wager to make sense, because the wager tries to emphasize the fear of being wrong if you don't believe. But there wouldn't be any fear if you didn't think that it mattered to God whether you believed or not. Okay, now just a little bit more from the McKim article. That's the main point, but there's a couple of additional statements that he adds at the end that kind of reinforce his overall argument and position. He next goes into what he calls the disadvantages of God's hiddenness. Okay, so he lists, I think, 4 or 5 points that he believes are less than ideal outcomes from the fact that God is hidden. These are things that would be better if God wasn't hidden. And so he thinks this is even further evidence that it must not matter much to God whether we believe in him or not. if he's going to remain hidden and allow us to deal with these so-called disadvantages. So one of the disadvantages is this: it makes it harder for people to believe in God. Okay, so most people believe in God. But for those that don't, some people wonder, why not? Why don't they? Well, it's, I think, a false stereotype that some have, that a non-believer is someone who just is like deviant or full of hatred for the idea of something divine, or, spiteful of order or structure or something. Instead, it's usually just a much more straightforward reason, which is that given that the evidence isn't overwhelming, you can't easily verify that God exists. Some people would say, well, without better evidence or proof, I just have to stay skeptical. I would only believe something where the evidence really makes it absolutely true or obvious. Now, what would make it easy for all these so-called skeptics to believe in God? It would be very easy for them to believe in God if God wasn't hidden. If God was just out there in the open and everybody could just tell for sure that God existed, then everyone would be on the same page. There wouldn't be this division. Some people believe, most people believe, some people don't. If God's existence was just as obvious as looking up in the sky and seeing the sun or the moon, then we would no longer have the debate that we're having in this class. Everyone would agree, and it would be 100% unanimous. God exists, and we can all agree to that. So if it's good to believe in God, as the major religions say, and if it's a source of shame or whatever not to believe in God, then God is not exactly making it as easy as it could possibly be for everybody to have the belief, because refusing to disclose his existence in an obvious, apparent way creates space for doubt, and that's why some people don't believe. So that's one thing. If this disadvantage wouldn't be there if God wasn't hidden, it would be very easy then for everybody to believe. A second disadvantage then that follows from this is it makes it harder for people to have a close personal relationship with God. Okay, so as probably a lot of you guys know, in the major world religious traditions, especially in Christianity, not only are you supposed to believe in God, I mean, that's almost like the bare minimum, but on top of that, you're also supposed to maintain and establish a close personal relationship with God. But ask yourself, what does it involve, having a close personal relationship with God or with anybody? Having those types of relationships means intimacy, trust, the sharing of hopes, dreams, fears, secrets, being vulnerable, communication. All of those kinds of aspects, the hallmarks of a close, intimate, personal relationship, are harder for some people anyway, if they can't get over their doubts as to whether the being on the other side of it really exists, So if God wasn't hidden and his existence was obvious and completely undisputable, then I think actually everybody would rush to have God as like a close personal friend that they could talk to, pray to, seek counsel and advice from. So what's standing in the way of people on a more universal basis all finding themselves in that kind of close personal relationship? Well, for some anyway, again, not knowing whether the being exists because he's hidden produces enough uncertainty and doubt for some to say, I'm not comfortable entering into this kind of intimate and vulnerable and confessional type of relationship with a being who I'm not sure to exist. If God wasn't hidden, though, it would eliminate all the doubts that people have that act as an obstacle for them entering into that type of relation. Okay, now third disadvantage of God's hiddenness. I'm going to erase the header and the title above so that I can just put that information on the board. So like disadvantages of God's hiddenness, one of them here, another one here, here's a third one. There's also the element of, since God is hidden, it makes it harder for people to devote themselves to and worship God. So Okay, so some of the major elements of religion are, of course, believing in God, having a close personal relationship with God. But over and beyond that, you're also supposed to, worship God and devote your whole life to Him. You're supposed to praise God. You're supposed to spread the word of God. You're supposed to place yourself submissively at the feet of God and worship Him as a supreme being, right? So what makes it hard for some people to do that is not knowing for a fact that He exists because He's hidden. It takes a serious dose of humility to prostrate yourself at the feet of like a superior being, pray to that being, ask for that being's good providence and good favor. So if God wasn't hidden, I think people would rush to be the most devout and the most allegiant to God, because there would be no longer any questions as to whether this would be rewarded or whether it was a worthwhile effort. So again, another thing that God being hidden makes it a little harder for at least some people to do, to fully devote themselves or to fully worship the being. And then two more things. A fourth disadvantage he talks about is that it creates social conflict and disagreement, God being hidden. Okay, so for this fourth so-called disadvantage, think about how in history and including the current day, religion is sometimes a source of bitter division and conflict in society, in the world. How many times have there been religious wars, or even within one and the same religion, interdenominational conflicts that tear people apart? Some people will fight to the death over their differences of religious belief or interpretation even. And this can divide whole societies, or it can divide families or friends from each other. So what is it that causes people to be so, in some cases, of course not in all cases, but in some cases so bitterly divided over their religious views that they would come to conflict? Well, one reason for that is because God being hidden cannot dispel all the controversies and disagreements, cannot say, hey, everybody, look, don't fight. Let us all be on the same page. I'm going to say something or reveal a new message to people which clearly expresses which version of religion I wanted people to practice, or what doctrines to follow and practice. So God being hidden creates room for a variety of different interpretations as to His will, as to His word, and that's what can, in some cases, promote these social conflicts and even individual and personal conflicts. So God, if He wasn't hidden, we could all basically be on the same page. We wouldn't have to fight tooth and nail over our various scriptural differences or differences of religious interpretation. And then the last one, I guess I'll have to erase this to make that last piece of space, but you already know these are all disadvantages of God's hiddenness. There's only one more that he talked about, and the last one is that it allows for con artists and frauds to operate. Okay, sad as it is, there have been in some cases people who have used the idea of religion or the divine to promote their own self-interest or financial interests. Like think of, for example, cult leaders like Jim Jones and the Jim Jones massacre. These are people who make a claim to a vulnerable population of people that are willing to believe them, that they have some kind of special connection to God, and that they're like a prophet, a modern day prophet, as it were, that speaks God's voice to them. And this in some cases allows people to assume positions of religious authority over others, and in some cases to take money from those people or to get them to dedicate their entire lives to the cult figure. So whether it's a cult leader or in some cases just people trying to make a buck off of religious concepts, even going back in history, the church used to sell for a little while what were called indulgences during the medieval period. And this was a practice where wealthy patrons of the church could give money to the church, and they said that this is going to win favor with God on Judgment Day. Later on, of course, the practice totally repudiated by the church itself. But this just shows you that sometimes people will use the concept of religion or the divine to operate a fraudulent scheme to promote their own self-interests. Now, how is it that those people can operate with impunity without being detected? Well, because God being hidden isn't out in the open exposing them as fakes or whatever, or as frauds. So if God was not hidden, he could say, don't listen to these people. That's a perversion of what I've said, or that's not the correct interpretation of my word. But being hidden, of course, people can make these claims without fear of reproach by an evidently existing God that will contradict them. So anyway, a set of 5 disadvantages, he calls them, of God being hidden. And this he then summarizes and returns to his main claim, which is that if God exists and chooses to be hidden, and chooses, therefore, to leave us to deal with these random, well, I should not say random, but this set of disadvantages, then in that case, it must be, or perhaps is the case, that there's a God, but he doesn't care whether we believe in him. And once again, looking at Pascal's wager, that would completely undermine all of the points made in Pascal's wager. Now, Olga, you say, is it still practiced through charitable donation, or has it pretty much disappeared in modern times? Well, no. I mean, good works are certainly one criteria that I would say all of the major world religions emphasize in winning the favor and the salvation of God. A charitable donation, I don't think, is in the same category, because it would be funneled to an actual, if it's an effective aid organization, it would be funneled to an actual needy group or cause. But, there have been some prominent religious figures, like heads of certain churches and stuff, that have been investigated for money laundering and using donations that they've received for their own personal expenses. So that would be kind of the case. But I don't want to paint with a broad brush saying charitable donation is in some sense corrupt or a source of concern. No, there's, I would say, many and most valid, legitimate agencies, and you can research online which have a better record of effectively passing the charitable money over to causes with a minimum of like overhead expense. So no, I don't think that charitable donation is in general always an example of the kind of practices that I'm mentioning, but it depends on the case, I guess. You have to look into the individual case. Some perhaps charities operate without actually providing a benefit to the affected population that they claim to benefit. So you have to, I guess, do a little research sometimes. But I don't want to say in all cases charitable donations are somehow there just to profit people that don't really need it. Okay, but good question. So yeah, we're done, I think, with the Robert McKim, everybody. So now you know about 2 different authors that could both be used in different ways as possible objection to Pascal's wager. So there's just one more author on this entire subject of philosophy of religion, and then we'll be done with this, and next week we'll move to the second topic of the semester. So our last author for this is Nicholas Everett. Nicholas Everett, so from 2004, his paper called Theism and Modern Science. Okay, Nicholas Everett, he's still alive, obviously. He's not that old, and he's a British philosopher who teaches in the University of East Anglia in England. This paper is called Theism and Modern Science, and the title pretty much sets you up for what the paper's about. He's exploring the question, what are the conflicts and the tensions that exist between science, in the modern day understanding of it, and religion? Probably a lot of you guys have heard that there seems to be some type of contradictions or conflicts between a scientific view of the world and a traditionally religious view of the world. Some people think that, no, these 2 things can merge or be brought together. But I've heard it said, and many people have said, that there are real conflicts between science and religion, that if you have a very strictly scientific view of everything, then that eliminates room for some religious beliefs. Or that if you have a very thoroughgoing religious viewpoint, then that makes it so that you can't accept certain scientific claims. Well, this author, Everett, does think that there are strong conflicts and tensions between science and modern science and religion. And so his paper is just to sort of give the reader a sense of where these contradictions are and why they don't go together so well, religion and science. At least that's his argument. Okay, so to kind of get the argument underway, to get the discussion underway, he gives us this kind of formal argument on page 67, I believe. And it looks a little technical at a first glance. So let me kind of break it down for you guys so that it's clear enough. It's on page 66, my bad. But anyway, here's what it looks like on the page. So it's an argument with two premises which lead to this conclusion below. The first premise, so I'm numbering them 1 and 2. The first premise says, if there is a being with, nature N and intention I, then in that case, the being will produce change C in the world. Okay, now let me explain that. I know at first it may look a little technical, but here's what it's saying. It says, imagine that you think there's some type of being that exists which has a certain type of nature, meaning that you have a sense of what it's like, what its qualities are, and it has a certain goal or intention. And so the letter N is just a sort of placeholder for whatever the given nature of the being might be. And the letter I is, again, a sort of variable that's a placeholder for whatever the specific intention of the being would be. So, in other words, suppose you think there's a being that is a certain type of way and has a certain type of goal. If so, then that means that it would do certain things in this world. And the things it would do, it labels as the change C that the being would produce. So beneath the jargon and so on, it's only saying this, that if you thought a being of some kind existed with certain type of goal, then that would put you in position to predict what it would likely do. Okay, but then suppose that you look for these behaviors that you would have expected to see if the being existed, and you don't see any of them. So second premise is, the world does not display these changes. The world does not display C. So the conclusion is therefore that there is evidence that the being does not exist. Okay, so let me walk you through a scenario that the author gives here to try and make clear exactly what kind of conclusion he's drawn in this argument. Okay, so what I want you to guys imagine is imagine a kind of like a situation of a castaway stranded on a deserted island. Maybe some of you have ever heard of movies or novels or TV shows that have this kind of theme. If so, let me know in the chat some of the more popular items in this genre. I can think of one that seemed to be a pretty popular, well-known movie, Castaway. Anybody ever heard of that with Tom Hanks? He somehow he gets onto a deserted island, stranded there from, I think, a plane crash that he was traveling from one place to another, and he washes ashore, and he's like making friends with this volleyball named Wilson. Anybody catching the reference? If so, let me know. Okay, if not, that's fine. But think of a situation like that, where a person just washes ashore on a deserted island. There's other movies and films like the same idea. If you go back into literature a little ways, there was Robinson Crusoe, old TV show Gilligan's Island, except I guess there was a group of those people. Lost more recently, but again, that was a group. Anyway, so just think of a situation where one person ends up, washing ashore on this island from having, I don't know, their vessel they were transporting around on kind of broke down, either a boat or a plane. Okay, so the person washes ashore, much to their disappointment, obviously. Now they're there on the island alone, and here's the first thought. Is it really just me, though? Maybe someone else also washed up on the island, like this person grabbed a piece of plywood from the broken boat and just floated to the shore, and they're thinking, well, there was other people in the same boat. Maybe someone else also found their way to the island, and I'm not the only survivor. So, the person really would like it if there was another survivor, because if so, they could help each other survive and make do until eventually they get rescued. So imagine that. Our stranded survivor on the island is questioning and wondering, is there another survivor also on the island? So now with attention to the first premise, he thinks in this way. If there is another survivor who's like me, who wants to be discovered, then that person would do certain things on the island, okay? So now he's thinking in his mind, what kind of things would this survivor do if they are on the island, if they exist? And then he's going to go out and search for those signs. So now a question for the chat. What would be these signs that he would be looking to discover to give him evidence that there's another survivor on the island? What would be the changes C that you would think were appropriate and expected if there was another survivor? So he's going to go out now, basically, looking for things like what? What would count, in your view, as signs of another individual on the island? Okay, good, Olga, like a fire, or, you know, like maybe crude tools or something, maybe a little enclosure that they build in some kind of shelter, right, like in a cave or whatever, maybe footprints, maybe a big SOS in the sand, maybe making noises, right? So imagine then that our shipwrecked individual goes out in search of all those signs. But what? Now we get to premise 2. But unfortunately, they canvass, they search high and low, they leave no stone unturned, like they say, but they don't see any signs like that. No fire pit, no tracks, no shelter, nothing. So now, having looked thoroughly for those signs that you would have expected if there were a survivor and you didn't find the signs, now you have evidence that what? Having conducted the search, turning up no signs, you've now got evidence that there is no such other survivor on the island, right? So that's basically the format of the argument here. Now that I've given you an example, hopefully it's a little bit more simple to you. All it's saying beneath the sophistry here is this. If you thought a certain being existed and you knew what they were like and what they wanted, then you could predict what behavior they would do. But if you don't see any signs of that kind of behavior or activity, then now you have evidence that this being did not actually exist. Okay, like when I was a very little kid, I don't know if this anecdote is good or bad or what, but like, you know, I was always kind of a curious child, and I was always given, I think, to skepticism and wondering and questioning things. So like even when I was like a little 5 or 6 year old and my parents were telling me about Santa Claus, I was like not so sure. I said, well, are you guys telling me the truth? Because it sounds a little weird. You say he flies around in a sled with reindeer drawing the sleigh, and I just don't see how that could possibly get airborne. I mean, you know, it doesn't make sense. And, you know, so I had all these questions, but they were just like, don't worry, it's magic or something. So one night, you know, it was Christmas Eve, and this is one of my earliest memories, actually. And so, like, we had a fireplace back then, and that's where, of course, Santa's supposed to show up, right? It comes down the chimney. So I said, if there really is this mythical gift giver who gives everyone gifts and he wants to deliver me a present tonight, then there's certain things that he would do if I just sit in front of the fireplace and watch. Like, I should be able to hear ho, 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 or the pitter-pat of hooves, or I should see him slide down the chimney or something. So I stayed up all night and waited in front of the fireplace, and, you know, nothing did happen. So that gave me evidence that he doesn't exist. So it's like the structure of the argument generalizes to many different cases. If there's ever a situation where you predicted another being existed and here's the things that they would do, but then you don't see those signs of behavior you would have expected, now you've gotten new evidence that maybe this is not a real thing. So now we get to the bigger question, what about God? Okay, so he says that in traditional religion, like all the major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they say that God created this universe, but that he didn't just do it for a random reason, that he created the universe specifically as a place for human beings to inhabit. So this is supposed to be a universe for the sake of mankind, right? We're not supposed to be just some random part of the universe. The whole thing is supposed to be that we're the children of God created in his image. So everything's supposed to kind of be built for the sake of man. And if God creates the universe for the sake of human beings to live in it, then he says there are certain features you'd expect the universe to exhibit. Okay, so what would be this apt universe if it was created by God just for our sake? Okay, and this is like the changes C, basically, that you'd expect to find if this universe was the creation of a creator God for the sake of human beings. So apt universe. Like in the previous case of the shipwrecked sailor or whatever, the apt behavior would have been, if there was another survivor, the signs of life. Apt universe is like what the universe should be like if the religious claim God made it for our sake is true. So one of them is this. you'd expect that mankind would appear early in the universe. Okay, I'm just going to list these features and then go through the discussion once I could get them on the board. So one, you'd expect it would appear early in the universe. Also, you'd think that mankind would appear not long after the other animals. You'd also think that we would be in the middle of the universe, so the Earth should be in the center of the universe. And then finally, one more, the universe would not be vastly larger than the Earth. Okay, 4 things that he's saying you would have expected the universe to be like if it was really the result of God creating it for just the sake of human beings. So first of all, if this whole universe is just designed for the sake of us to live in it, then don't you figure we would have appeared way early in the overall history of the universe? What would be the point of God creating a universe for our sake, for human beings' sake, but then not having us arrive in the universe until much, much later in time? You would have thought that God, making it for the sake of mankind, would have put us in there way back at the beginning. And of course, in the stories of Genesis from the Bible, that is said. It's said that God created everything in 7 days, and on the 7th day that he rested. And why, of course, did they say this? Because it would not have made sense to anybody reading the scriptures if it said, God created the universe and then just waited, 14 billion years and then said, let there be man or whatever. It didn't make sense. It wouldn't have made sense to people interpreting or reading that scripture. And so the assumption that would have been appropriate is included in Genesis. Right? So that's one thing you'd expect, that we would appear early, because if the whole point of the universe is to be a place just for us, then what would have been the point of leaving the rationale for the whole universe absent from it until the end? Second of all, you'd think that we would appear not long after the other non-human animals. Okay, now you might have wanted to put those other non-human animals in there first, just a little ways before us, because then we could have things to eat and use for clothing, and maybe horse to draw like a chariot, or like whatever, oxen or something. But what would be the point of having us appear way later after the other animals? To have a universe that's full of just non-human animals running around for billions of years, and then humans appearing at the end. That wouldn't make sense if the whole point was just to have the universe set up for us. And then next, you'd think that the Earth would be right in the center of the universe. If God created the universe for the sake of human beings, then shouldn't we have a kind of central position, pride of place, where everything else is not centralized and revolves around us? That was a very important idea to the early generations of the Christian church, all the way up until the early modern period in the late Renaissance, because when telescopes were invented and Galileo and Copernicus started using them to show through observation that we rotate around the sun and not the other way around, this was considered unorthodox and heretical by the church. And in fact, Galileo was forced to recant his testimony in public under penalty of death, because they thought, it's not going to make sense to anybody why God would have created the universe with humans in just a random position, third planet from the sun, not even in the middle of our local cosmos. Now, of course, in the years and centuries since that happened, the church has formally apologized to Galileo and his descendants, because it's no longer controversial or debated at all that we're not in the center of the universe. But that was an important assumption that, theologians of previous generations thought if we didn't hold this belief, then it would start to incline people towards skepticism of God's existence, because why aren't we in the middle? And then finally, you'd think that the universe would not be way, way, way bigger than the Earth. If the universe is built just for the sake of mankind to live in it, then why would it be that we are so small in comparison to everything else. You'd think that there wouldn't have been all this void space that people can't ever travel to, do anything with. So it would have been thought that the universe, in comparison to the Earth, is not that much bigger than it. But now, in scientific consensus view of like modern science, none of these things are true. And so that's where he says it's the equivalent of the world not displaying the changes that you would have expected if the hypothesized being were to exist. So first of all, did we appear early in the universe? Well, if you accept the scientific consensus, not at all. I mean, the current most reliable estimate scientifically is that the universe has been here for like 15 billion years, and the planet Earth something like 5 billion years. But even on the planet Earth, how long have human beings existed? Well, depending on how you define humans, if it's the current form of Homo sapiens, the most reliable estimates give us about 100,000 to maybe 500,000 years. If you compare that to the size of the whole, the time of the whole universe, it's infinitesimally small. So it's really like we've arrived very late to the party in the universe's timeline. If you were to compare it to a graph of a 24-mile line, and that represents the timeline of the universe's whole history, relative to that 24 miles, human beings would have appeared in the last 2 inches of that 24 miles. So right at the very end, it's almost like a marathon length, 26.2 miles, and only on the last 2 inches of that stretch are humans in the timeline. Next, we would have not appeared long after the other animals, but science appears to contradict this also. Even on the planet Earth, we're late to arrive. So for 99% of the Earth's history, whatever life, well, for the early portion of the Earth's history, let me be clear, correct what I've said. In the early portion of the history of Earth, for millions, billions of years, we just had primordial forms of life, paramecium, little microbial life forms, and it took a lot longer, according to science anyway, for those things to evolve into vertebrate life, and reptilian and mammalian life, and then, this highly sophisticated bipedal intelligent life form that we are. So not only did we not appear early in the history of the universe overall, but on the planet Earth, at least according to carbon dating and fossil methods that we use to trace the origins of species, we're quite late to arrive. And how much sense would that make if the whole point of the universe was to create a place for man to inhabit, with man appearing way later in the place that was designed just for him? And then third, you'd think the Earth would be in the center of the universe, but I guess I already kind of talked about that. It's established that it's not. So yet another assumption of traditional theism that would seem to be contradicted by science. And finally, the universe is way, way bigger than the Earth. Even to get to the next closest star to our sun, that's Alpha Centauri, you have to travel at the speed of light for 4 years plus. The speed of light is the maximum physical speed in the universe because light conveys all information, and that's 186,000 miles per second. So imagine traveling at that incredible speed for a full presidential term just to get to the next star. But this universe we're in doesn't just have a few stars, it has billions of stars, and beyond that, billions of galaxies which house the stars. So the actual scale of the overall universe is just mind-boggling in its scope. And in comparison to that, the planet Earth is like a tiny little speck of dust in this big cosmic array of things. So we don't seem to have pride of place. We're quite small in the big picture. Mankind appeared very much later than other animals and also way later than the whole universe. So he thinks that the features you would have expected the universe to have if it was the product of God for the sake of man just aren't seen in science. So in the end, he says, this is what gives evidence, if you follow the scientific analysis of reality, that there's no, at least traditional creator God as was mentioned in the scriptures. But, as we finish this topic in our class now, it's really up to you as a judge of these arguments, what you think. Some people will hear these arguments and say, well, there might have been a misinterpretation about what the universe ought to be like if it was created by God. Other people might say, well, I reject the scientific consensus claims. Or someone might say, I reject the religious claims and I just hardcore favor the science claims. I mean, each one of us is an individual making our own determinations in life. My job is just to expose you to these different philosophical arguments that have come before, and that way you can inform yourself and have an opinion that's based on at least some argument and some information. So that's it for you guys. We finished up our whole philosophy of religion unit now, so I'm happy to say that we're moving on. On Monday, we'll start talking about the writing of John Stuart Mill. I'm going to make one slight edit to the syllabus too. I'm going to have to take out the article of next Wednesday, which was called Extreme and Restricted Utilitarianism. So I'm just going to remove that one to create a little more space for the Mill, and we'll talk about him on both Monday and Wednesday. Other than that, I'm also going to send the office hours Zoom link just now. I didn't get to do it this morning, but I have office hours every Friday from 11 to 12. And so if anyone had any interest in stopping by, just follow the link. I'm going to send it off in the next 5 minutes or so. But other than that, if you don't want to come for any reason, of course, I'll just see you back on Monday. Okay, guys, so thanks again. Thanks again for all your help and participation. Make sure to keep attending, and if you have any needs or any questions, just email me, and I'll be answering your messages over the weekend too. Okay, guys, so before I go, let me make sure we're all together. Okay, thanks, guys. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.